Sometimes for your interviews, you want lighting that looks a little bit more natural. So in this case, we're going to take a look at book lighting. Now here, for example, we have a scene that is clearly lit. It's very obvious that we're using lights. We're using a light behind us. We're using some sort of soft light from over here, and we've got a little bit of a rim light there. Sometimes you want something that looks much more natural, like it really wasn't lit. It's just a beautiful space that you happen to find. Now you might be tempted to say, well, why don't I just use existing light? And some people even brag, I'm the master of existing light. Well, that's great if you can pull it off, but the reality is if you're getting paid to do a job here, then you really don't have the luxury of waiting for a cloud to move so that it's not blocking the sun anymore, or any other weird things like that. So let's talk about a way to achieve lighting that looks fairly natural, like this, using something called book lighting. Now, first of all, what is book lighting? Book lighting is interesting because what book lighting does is it's a very soft light source, but the way you achieve that is you achieve it by doing two types of diffusion. Number one, you bounce the light off of some sort of reflective surface, and then in addition to that, once it bounces off that reflective surface, you also bring it through another piece of diffusion. So it's diffused twice, and it makes a very, very soft, very, very large light source that looks really quite natural. So here's how you do that. Now, obviously, you're going to need some sort of light, possibly more than one. It can be hard or it can be soft. It really doesn't matter because the diffusion and the bounce that you're going to use will do the softening work for you. It's perfectly fine if you don't have very powerful lights, and you're going to need quite a bit of light to make this happen because you're diffusing it twice. It's perfectly fine to use more than one. So if you've got two or even three, you can gang them all together and shoot them at the bounce through the diffusion at your talent. Next up, you need a very large bounce surface. Now, typically what I use here is the white side of a sound blanket, and I can put this on a C-stand. So here, for example, I arrange the C-stand with its boom arm into a T position. I clamp the sound blanket onto the light stand or the C-stand, and then I lift it up. And that creates this very large bounce surface that I can aim the light at and bounce it off of that. Now, a sound blanket is not the only piece of bounce that you can use. A lot of times you'll find people using unbleached or bleached muslin. So bleached will be a whiter color. Unbleached will have a little bit more of a straw color to it, a little bit warmer. And that can be a really nice look if you want to warm things up just a little bit. And if you just have maybe a foam core poster board, you can use that as well. The larger, the better. It really should be fairly large. Then you create the book shape by putting the diffusion at an angle to the bounce surface in front of it. And so in this case, we're using half soft frost. Soft frost is a diffusion material. It's made by a company called Roscoe. I'll put a link down below if you're interested in that. It comes in rolls. And so in this case, what I did is I put another C-stand in front of this. I oriented the boom arm so that it sticks straight out so I could just place the roll right on the boom arm. And then I used a little spring clamp to keep the roll from falling off. And I just unrolled some of that material, and we have this beautiful soft light that comes out of this. Now, the reason I use soft frost is that it does diffuse. It's a fairly light diffusion, especially half soft frost, and it doesn't cut the light as much, and you need a lot of it. So for example, in this particular scene right here, I am bouncing off the sound blanket and then through the half soft frost, and I would say the half soft frost is about 1.5 meters to 2 meters away from me, a little bit farther than I typically operate. And I had to turn this Gemini 1x1 hard light from Litepanels to 100%. And that's a fairly powerful light. In fact, that's one of the most powerful 1x1s on the market. So what you're going to want to do is either move the light source even closer, or you may have to use several lights to punch enough light in there, bounce it off of the bounce through the diffusion to get it onto your talent. Now, there are other kinds of diffusion you can use. Of course, you could use a scrim, you could use a silk, you could use a 4x4 with some sort of silk or fabric on it. Anything you choose. The least expensive way is probably through a 5-in-1 reflector. The center portion is a round scrim, and you could mount that up on a C-stand or another light stand, and that would probably be the least expensive way to do it. The other things like a 4x4, you have a little bit more control over how you angle it. So you can angle it just right towards your talent. That's the advantage of using that. But there are creative ways to angle a scrim that comes from the 5-in-1 reflector as well. So you have lots of options depending on your budget. Just like with the other interview setups that we've done, I would generally recommend having the light on the far side of the face as opposed to the side of the face is closest to the camera. So if you're having the talent look off camera a little bit, you should be lighting this side of their face and not this side of their face. This side's closer to the camera. So that just adds more interest and more dimension to the overall shot. One other thing I've found with book lighting is sometimes because it creates this massive soft light source, it can end up going everywhere. And sometimes that's fine, that's okay. But other times you may need to use a flag of some sort to keep it from falling in places where you don't want the light to go. So if you're trying to control things and prevent the light from going all over your background, you may need to use some sort of flag. So here, for example, we're using one of the super flags that we covered in another episode. I'll put a link for that video up here. It was called Block Bounce Diffuse. So we just talked about using different types of flags and bounce materials to get the look you want. Now, of course, that's just the key light. So now you still have to go through the other steps and add the additional dimension to your shots. You're typically going to want some sort of rim light or some sort of hair light, topper, something like that to separate your talent from the background. Now, when you're trying to go for a very natural look, you have to be super, super subtle with those backlights, the hair lights, or whatever you're using. That's where I think you're going to want to dial that down so it's just barely separating your subject from the background. And then, of course, you can always add some sort of additional lighting in the background. So, for example, in this shot, we are using a light that was shot through a plant that was sitting on the counter, and that created this sort of mottled light on the cabinets over to this one side. Now, in this particular shot, we were shooting in a situation where the sun was still in the sky. It was pretty low on the horizon, but we wanted to make sure that we didn't totally change the scene as the sun continued to move, or actually the Earth kept rotating and we lost sun. So we used a book light here. Now, of course, again, you'll notice that I'm lighting the far side of the face. So as our talent is looking off camera just a little bit, we're lighting the side of her face that's farthest from the camera. And we are using a book light. So we put up a white sound blanket on a C-stand, and we oriented the C-stand boom so that it made a T shape, lifted that up. We aimed our Gemini 1x1 hard light at that sound blanket, and in this case, we only had to turn it to 35. So sometimes if you're mixing with existing light, you're not going to need nearly as much light from your light source. So that's a really helpful thing as well. And then again, just like before, we are using half soft frost as the other piece of diffusion for the book light here. Again, mounted on a C-stand with the boom arm sticking out and a little spring clamp to hold the roll of half soft frost on the boom stand. And that's all we really did here. So overall, hope that was helpful for you. If you have any questions, go ahead and leave those down below. And if you've not already subscribed, make sure you do that. And be sure to get you more great videos on how to improve your lighting and sound for video. Talk to you soon.